Welcome back to the TwinSpires Racing Roundtable. I'm Ashley Anderson here with Vance Hansen and Nick Tamara to talk drumroll, please, in the Jerome Stakes, a pair of fillies from Richard Mandella's barn and other performances that caught our eye this weekend. And Nick, welcome to the roundtable. Thanks for filling in for James. And if you haven't met Nick before on the roundtable, he's filled in a few times for us. You may have caught him at TwinSpires with our expert pick videos. He's also a morning line maker, a track announcer, and staying busy as a Houston sports fan as well.
I'm trying to find something I'm good at, Ashley. It's great to join you, of course, and glad to be here to talk a little 3-year-olds on the Derby Trail.
Yeah, and congrats to the Texans on the playoffs. No one expected that.
No, we'll go from 3 wins to a division title happily.
All right, well, let's move it back over to horse racing and talk drumroll, please, in the Jerome Stakes, a Kentucky Derby prep raced at a mile at Aqueduct. And Nick, tell us, what were your impressions of drumroll, please, in that race?
Yeah, so this is a horse that I think had hinted at having some ability going all the way back to Saratoga. And I know the day that he finished second behind Locked, I liked him that day. He was pretty highly regarded coming into his debut. And, just one of those Brad Cox horses that maybe needed a little bit more time. He broke his maiden at third asking, came back in a pretty tough spot in the Remsen. And I think those of us that were believers that there may have been a track profile that was pretty exaggerated on the particular card that the Remsen was run on, felt like Drumroll Please was a horse that was really up against it in terms of how wide he was around the far turn. I thought this was a good workman-like effort, but I have to admit, Ashley, I'm worried that Drumroll Please might just be a little bit more competent version of Slip Mahoney. He's kind of looking the same way. He's not really taking a step forward speed figure wise, but what we know is he finished up with interest. He's probably a horse based on pedigree that's going to get better with distance. And we'll see really how that goes when he tries a race like the Withers, which I think is his next spot at 9 furlongs.
Vance, what do you think?
Yeah, I thought he won solidly enough over an unremarkable field as a heavy favorite in the Jerome. The surface was noticeably deep and producing slow times all day. And of course, I think that contributed also to his 83 Brisnet speed rating, which was the second lowest of his career. He is 2 for 2 over one-turn races at Aqueduct, so I think a race like the Gotham in March would be an ideal spot for him, but obviously the connections are inclined to try him 2 turns again in the Withers, as Nick said. He ran third in the Remsen 2 starts ago. As Nick alluded to, the profile of the track was working against horses with his running style. It was generally speed favoring all day on that card. So I think he deserves a shot to see what his 1.125 2-turn prowess is again next month in the Withers. But and another knock besides the lower speed rating of 83, the Jerome really hasn't found its legs since it's been repurposed as a nominal Kentucky Derby prep more than a decade ago. And typically you just don't see too many major Kentucky Derby contenders come out of this race. So he's obviously going to have to improve as the races and prep races get stronger, Ashley.
You all mentioned his speed figures, and his career best was in his second start, a 96, when he was second to Locked. And if you look at the top 3 on the leaderboard right now, we have Fierceness, Locked, and Timberlake, all with triple-digit speed figures. And the fact that, drumroll please, came back, of course, like the track was running slow and he got an 83 in this race, but I'm going to need to see improvement on that speed figure rating to feel like he's really a contender here. And certainly we'll wait until I see what he does in the Withers, if he does, in fact, race on February 3rd. Well, let's move over to the fillies and Richard Mandella's barn, and he has Kopion, who just dominated by more than 5 lengths in the Santa Ynez, a Kentucky Oaks prep on Sunday. But Mandella also has Tamara. So which of these 2 fillies do you feel like is the better prospect at the moment, Vance?
Well, in the short term, I'd say Kopion, as Tamara continues to heal from a minor splint fracture she suffered in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. However, long term, I'd still give Tamara the edge. What she showed last summer at Del Mar in both her maiden win and in the Del Mar debutante. She was overestimated as an odds-on choice in the Breeders' Cup, but she's probably a lot better than what she showed that day. And of course, she has the great lineage in her favor, being a daughter of the 4-time champion and Hall of Famer Beholder. Kopion didn't have to break much of a sweat to win the Santa Ynez against the field that was assembled to face her, which wasn't a whole lot. And I think a road trip outside Southern California is probably be required in order for her to receive an actually proper test of her talents, Nick.
Yeah, I really can't argue with any of that. I kind of you more or less said exactly what I was going to, which is that long term, I think Tamara is a better prospect. Of course, I don't know much about what the time frame is like in terms of her potentially getting onto the Oaks Trail. I hope that's the case because I do think she's a much better filly than what we saw in the Breeders' Cup. And you mentioned, of course, she came out of that with injury. There was also a lot of discussion leading up to that juvenile fillies about her training a little bit subpar, and she certainly ran to it. So I mean, a filly that still put up to me what was the best performance, the best individual performance by a dirt filly in 2023, which was that Del Mar debutante. And that's, of course, taking nothing away from just FYI's wins in both the Frizette and the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. But Tamara was really electric that day. And I think beat a field that top to bottom was obviously a lot better than what Kopion beat the other day. I mean, Kopion was 1-5 in a 4-horse race, and her biggest competition blew the break. So, I mean, it's easy to look really good when the circumstances are like that. But I think you start to kind of pick it apart a little bit, and you certainly can find some things to hold against her, at least until she goes 2 turns, maybe meets some better competition. Now, one thing that you have to at least acknowledge is that the Southern California 3-year-old filly ranks have been pretty thin most recent years, and so there might not be much for Kopion to beat, depending on the status of a horse like Tamara leading up to the Breeders' Cup. I hope that somebody's out there that maybe can try and upset things a little bit because I'd like to see her tested against some better competition as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you all. I think Tamara is the better prospect long term. And looking at Bristnet speed figures, since I'm all about the Bristnet speed figures, she had a 100 in her career best. And Kopion had a 94, I believe, in her win most recently, which was just a few points higher than the debut figure of Tamara. And of course, looking at pedigree, Tamara has a lot in her favor, but so does Kopion because she's by Omaha Beach and out of a Victory Gallop mare. Of course, Victory Gallop won the Belmont, and it was a runner-up to Real Quiet in the Derby and the Preakness. So classic pedigree there as well, but I'm still giving Tamara the edge. All right, Nick, let's talk about what else caught your eye over the weekend. Who stood out to you?
Well, I mean, I have to mention just a wild performance from Sunday at Aqueduct that I don't know if any of us really anticipated. In the opening leg of the Pick Six, it was the 4th race, and the heavy favorite was a first-time starter from the Todd Pletcher barn named Crimson Light. And if you've not seen this replay, I think you're going to get a chance to look at it right now. This horse won with absolutely no reason to win whatsoever. Completely botched the start, hopped, looking like he was going to end up hitting the temporary rail that they put up at the gap, and lost contact with the field. Obviously, anybody who's even the slightest bit skilled race watcher was going to realize that the only way this horse won was for the race to have been slow, right? There was no way anybody was putting up a reasonable speed figure and still being run down by a horse that spotted them a football field. But this was a tremendous performance and an effort where him digging in to catch those horses like that, who knows what would have happened if he got a clean break. But here's to imagining he did and maybe ran 30 points higher, which doesn't really seem all that far-fetched. This was a performance that, certainly not all that great holding on the clock. It really doesn't even matter. You don't see horses win with these kind of things going on ever. And so I think we're all Crimson Knight fans in many ways, even if he ends up being nothing but an allowance horse.
Yeah, that was one of the wilder race replays I've seen in a long time. It looked like he wanted to jump the rail. And then if you look at his speed figures, he had a 47 E1 rating, then a 61, and then a 105 late pace rating. So
Yeah.
haven't seen that in a long time either.
No, I mean, talk about uplining on pace figures. I mean, this is a horse that essentially just galloped for 3 furlongs and then more or less took off. And they were coming back to him pretty well, but still, he had to go get him to an extent. I enjoyed Chris Griffin's call as well. He was, I think, as shocked as anybody watching the race that there was this horse angling out widest of all, and you thought, could he possibly get there? And he got there in the nick of time. It was a really, really interesting performance from Crimson Light for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You should definitely watch the whole replay if we're not showing the whole replay on the roundtable. And Vance, what else caught your eye this weekend?
Races like the Wait a While Stakes and Ginger Brew Stakes at Gulfstream have not been traditional springboards to greatness for turf fillies. Ozara, who's won both of those races in the past month, potentially might be cut from a different cloth. She was a winner on debut in a key maiden race at Saratoga last summer. Subsequently finished 4th in the one-turn Natalma at Woodbine and then 2nd in the Chelsea Flower at Aqueduct. But she's really found her stride in Florida this winter, and she took Saturday's Ginger Brew Stakes by a comfortable 2 1/4 lengths An impressive raw time, at least, of 1:33.85 for a mile, which was considerably faster than the slow-paced stakes for colts just a little bit later in the afternoon. If anything, Ozara has her value as a broodmare prospect has skyrocketed in the last month with those 2 stakes wins. She's an Irish bred by Lope de Vega, who stands for a 6-figure fee over in Europe, and she's out of a half sister to Golden Horn, who won the 2015 Epsom Derby and Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. So she's got a monstrous pedigree. She's trained by Christophe Clement, who knows how to handle a good turf filly. We'll see what happens to her if they kind of back off of her right now and wait for Keeneland and some more lucrative races later in the summer. But Ozaro, to me, looks like a 3-year-old filly turf filly watch going forward.
Well, speaking of Christophe Clement, I was going to also mention LSU Stables' Ari's Magic, who won on debut by more than 4 lengths at Tampa Bay Downs in a 6-furlong maiden special weight. Now, the reason this caught my eye is because of his pedigree. He's sired by Good Magic, who, of course, sired the Derby winner Mage from last year, and then out of a Pioneer of the Nile mare, and Pioneer of the Nile, obviously, famously sired Triple Crown winner American Pharoah. So a horse to certainly watch after winning on debut. And as I mentioned, trained by Christophe Clement, who's more so known as a turf trainer, but did win the 2014 Belmont with Tonalist. So he has that Triple Crown race to his resume. Don't know what to expect going forward with Ari's Magic. He is getting his first start as a 3-year-old, but Mage proved me wrong last year, in a long history of the Kentucky Derby. I was telling people to maybe shy away from Mage because hadn't raced at 2, and only 2 horses previously had won the Derby after not racing at 2. But I've found the last 5 Derbies, something odd happens every Derby. So maybe look out for Ari's Magic to do something similar. Were you all impressed at all by Ari's Magic?
Yeah, I thought it was very solid. I agree. I think, could definitely be a real prospect moving forward.
Yeah, and I would say to your point about the Derby in the last 5 years, almost what we used to call Derby rules are totally out the window now, and you just got to take the horses individuals now and almost like throw most trends out the window and away from your thinking on the day, I think.
I know very, very early, but Vance, do you have a horse that you feel like you're going to see progress as a 3-year-old and actually do feel like is a solid contender for the Derby?
None at the top of my list. I am very interested to see if Fierceness, the likely 2-year-old champion, see how much he progresses. I know he's going to have a very limited prep campaign, and so he's going to be if he makes it to Churchill Downs, he's going to have, at most 4 or 5 starts underneath him. And, it doesn't take that much, I guess, these days to win the Derby, but I'm most interested to see how much he progresses and whether the extra distance is going to help him.
What about you, Nick? You got a short list?
Yeah, I think, look, I'm certainly very intrigued by what Fierceness does now as a 3-year-old with what we saw in the Breeders' Cup. But I think his stablemate Locked is one that maybe I'm a little bit more interested in seeing how he performs coming back as a 3-year-old. And then Sierra Leone is a horse that really caught my eye in the Remsen, making the move that he did, being wide, coming from off the pace. With that said, Dornoch as well, who won the Remsen, is a horse that, albeit likely with the help of the track profile, still ran a very fast race in terms of a pace and how he ended up finishing. So I'm looking forward to seeing how all of those perform. I know we'll have the Lecomte at Fairgrounds now week after next, and that'll give us a little bit of a line on where everybody's starting as things heat up. But those are kind of the 2 horses that, other than the obvious Fierceness, are the ones that I'm kind of keeping my eye on.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with Fierceness after I decided to fade him, or not really fade. He wasn't favored in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, but the joke around here is that I don't like full siblings to Mage. So I'm still cautious with Dornoch. We'll see what happens, but certainly keeps proving me wrong every single time.
So far, so good for him, that's for sure.
All right, well, that's all the time we have today for the Racing Roundtable. Thanks for joining us again, Nick. And we'll be back on Tuesday with more racing recaps. And of course, on Thursday, our best bets and fades on the TwinSpires jury. We'll see you then.